Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. This is the first of the AIM Shop, AIM Technologies webinars for 2022. And today we're going to be covering something which is quite timely in relation to where we are in the sort of racing season. And that's right at the beginning where people are deciding what is the right setup for them. What are they working on? So we're going to do a bit of a sort of Q&A and some sort of questions. I have a prepared list of questions which have been created. On this webinar, I'm also going to be joined by James Mully from AIM Technologies, who's on. We'll be hearing from James, who will be the person answering a lot of our questions as we go through. That said, having noticed who some of the people are on the call as well, I'm sure we can keep the conversation going. The idea of today is that I will go through some quick introductory slides in terms of some thought starters for people to think about as they think through what kind of systems that they're going to be installing, or should they upgrade, or what to take into account. Then we're going to go into a Q&A session, and hopefully we'll use up all the time. Usually it goes a little bit longer as we go, but if it doesn't, we'll make sure that this gets sort of put online for everyone to be able to watch at a later date and reference on a regular basis. So what I'm going to do is I am going to share my screen, and I am going to do that right now. Whoops, I'm not going to do that one there. I'm going to share the screen, and for a moment you should see some Zoom stuff, and some later slides. So let's just do that. So hopefully I get a sort of a thumbs up or a yes in the chat that you should be able to see my screen.
Good.
Yeah, which is good. As said, today is, we could have called this webinar all sorts of different things. It could be what setup do I need in 2022? What's the right system for me to be able to use? All sorts of different areas. But I think one of the things that's really important as we start to look at installing devices or buying devices to be able to help us with a lot of our sort of data needs, I think the biggest question as we go through this process is going to be along the lines of, why do I need that, and what am I going to get from it, and is it something that makes sense for me going forward? And so what I thought we'd cover in the early part of sort of the conversation today are the variables in your decision-making criteria, some of the things that you need to think through to be able to ensure that you're installing, or you are buying, or you are investing, I should say, in the right setup to be able to get the most out of sort of AIM hardware. As we go through, I'm sure this year you'll see that AIM hardware also works very closely with AIM software, as you'd imagine, to be able to get the most out of that as a driver, as an engineer, as a mechanic. And so we'll look at that. The second thing we need to think about is allowing for growth. And so growing your setup over time. I'm one of those people who will never be satisfied with the data that I have in relation to the number of channels that I have to analyze. And I've deliberately sort of limited my growth of channels based upon a few key variables. The first is what's available to me based upon the vehicle that I'm setting up. And that has varied depending on what type of race car, in my case, I've been using. The second thing is that I don't want to do too much too quickly, because arguably I'd fall into the analysis paralysis bucket, and all of a sudden I wouldn't be able to know whether I'm turning left or right or what I'm looking at. And so slowly being able to allow for growth and being able to sort of develop your appreciation and conversation there. And then we're going to get into question and answers with the other James, of which James and I will hopefully be able to answer some of the questions. I should be asking all the questions. And to be honest, I think that James is by far one of the most qualified people to help answer the question, not only working for AIM, but is always somebody who, when I reach out to, saying, I need this, or I'm stuck with this, or thinking about this with this car, I've got a friend with this, or I want to do that, fountain of knowledge. And so I think we'll be in good hands there, which is going to be great. So let's crack on. So I think the first and most important thing is, and I put it in big letters, I think, just so I could fill the page. But in many respects, the most important question is, when selecting a device, is what are you trying to accomplish? It sounds like the strangest thing to be able to say in terms of what are you really trying to accomplish in relation to sort of setup, but it falls into I would argue sort of three different categories. And it's funny, I've used these categories before in different webinars. If any of you attended the webinar that I did, or we did, I should say, in December, we talked about workflows, and workflows are really designed to be able to address certain key aspects of the data that you have, to be able to either improve your car, improve the driver, improve the chassis, understand how the engine's working, all those sort of things. And so it's really important as you think about what system and setup you're going to be installing, is to think about what are you trying to accomplish, because at that point, it's a key component. And so just making life simple, and I've simplified a lot of today's conversation. The devil's in the details in terms of the nuances, in terms of setup, and that's why working with somebody like James is going to be so key, as are any of the folks who are readily available from AIM, to be able to help you figure this out. But I think there's three different types of components that people want to be able to accomplish. The first is driver development. And if that's your only goal, something as simple as an AIM Solo 2 might be all you need to be able to develop the driver. But we'll get into this in a little bit more detail in terms of thinking. Then you've got the aspect of vehicle operation and monitoring. And this might be in the case of, installing hardware that will act as a dash. And whether you've got a street car and you put in one of the Strada devices, it's designed for being able to help you and give you sort of an advanced dash within your street car. Or in the case of many of us, we may be racers, we may have bikes, we may have ATVs. In my case, we've got cars. We will use AIM devices not only for driver development, but for vehicle operation monitoring, having an RPM, having a tachometer, having, same thing there, sorry, having one of those days, speedo, oil temperature, engine temps, all those things, you get into the aspect of vehicle operation, and then the monitoring and making sure that you're, maintaining a healthy vehicle. And so there's an element of sort of when you're in a certain position, especially those who may be sort of installing in a new build, for example. Many of us put AIM devices in when we start with a new vehicle. I know I'm in the exact situation right now, and have been in the past, where investing a lot of time in a new vehicle. And so the question is as we go through these variables, what are we trying to accomplish? And then the last and last by no means last, but for the purposes of simplicity, is the vehicle and chassis development. And I put a picture of a channel expansion there, because that's where I am right now personally, and I think a lot of people are. And this could be thinking about, when I'm thinking about my system, is this a case of upgrading? Do I start adding more channels? Because this is where you can start getting into additional components that get added to your vehicle that may not necessarily come from the car itself, or may not come from the baseline information that you get from your original device. And so that might be adding in suspension travel. It might be adding in such information such as tire pressure monitoring. And so all of these allow you to be able to advance. Now, the reality is that many of us may sit in one of these buckets. And the number of people who I've spoken to who really just look at their AIM Solo 2 as a lap timer, and then look at it a bit of GPS device to be able to do driver development, that covers a lot of people. Then I've met so many people at the track, and I'm sure we all have, who have a dash, and they have a dash in their car. And sometimes it is a surprise to them that held within the dash is amazing data that help them monitor the driver's performance, the car's performance that can be downloaded and operated. And then by the time we get into vehicle development, the people who really know what they're doing, and we're really starting to add components. But all the way we've gone along, it is oftentimes a surprise to many people that within these AIM devices holds a treasure trove of amazing data that will help them operate. And very similar to what we talked about last time we all met, was talking about aspects such as how do I improve the driver? How do I improve the car? How's the car performing? And all those things that we've sort of discussed. And so the idea being any and all of these are applicable. The next aspect is, well, what is your immediate budget? And when I say immediate budget, that's the initial investment that you have to be able to, build your system, because this may change the sort of the decisions that you make in terms of the devices that you buy based upon your budget. And the other key consideration is to think about, will it grow over time? And so when I talk about growing over time, that relates to a topic in terms of, are there opportunities that you want to be able to have to expand your opportunity? And so, for example, if you wanted a lap timer and then slowly over time you wanted to add a camera to that lap timer, then it might be prudent to start off buying an AIM Solo 2 DL rather than just the AIM Solo, because at that point you can add in over time the additional camera to be able to enhance your system. And the same sort of concept applies. So it's really important to think about what your immediate budget is, and then whether that budget will grow, because it might stop you from investing in a system that will cap out at a certain point and you can't add any more, which might become a frustration if you want to be one of those people who adds more channels and adds more information. So immediate budget is a key component. And it seems like an obvious thing to say, what is your budget? But I think it varies depending on sort of a little bit more investment now might set you up for a much longer term opportunity to grow your system. And I'm one of those who systematically over time add more and more as budget allows, or in many instances as opportunity to be able to learn more applies. And so that's there. But when we think about what's in your budget or what your budget is, and this is a build rather than a very bad slide, I might add, is if you think about, you've got your lower end, and if you start in the lower end of sort of budgets that folks may have, it may be sort of £500 or slightly less in that sort of area. If you think about that, and then you go higher than sort of, I've just put two nominal numbers here, a £2,000 budget, but it could be more, could be sort of slightly less, all those sort of things. And I think that that's determined on the specific setup that you choose. There's a continuum a sort of spectrum continuum, sounds like a sort of space odyssey conversation today, but there is a spectrum of opportunity. And as you start on the lower end, you're looking at GPS-based devices that will give you GPS information that you can use really, really sort of well to give you driver development, which is there. Then as your budget increases, you can add information that may be streamed in from your vehicle, from the vehicle's ECU. And so, the next upgrade might be from a Solo 2 to a Solo 2 DL, where you can pipe in, feed of ECU vehicle ECU data that will allow you to see the information that's available within the car's, engine management system, and also start to add video. And then as you get further and further towards the higher end spectrum, this is where you start adding in even more components, sort of not only the ECU, but video, sensors. You can add in power distribution models, all sorts of things that allow you to be able to do more. But what I wanted to do is to sort of put it into the context of the purpose by which you are really trying to sort of implement. And this is why it's a build, because it's an ugly slide if you looked at it in one go. So the first aspect is I want to break this down into three different areas. You've got GPS, then you've got GPS and ECU, and then all of the sensors and everything there later on. So the first is driver development. And driver development is something which is available across every single device. It is such a nice situation to be in that if you work with anyone who's got any AIM device, probably over the last 10 years, I'll say, or so, there will always be a scenario where there is the opportunity for interoperability on data analysis for driver development, even if somebody is using a very old AIM Solo original and someone is using one of the most advanced and latest data loggers like an Evo 5. All of these are available in relation to sort of driver development on the GPS side. But then as you want to start adding more and more sort of information to develop your driver, like you want to add video, or you want to be able to see what the driver's doing in terms of feet movement, so you can get throttle that's coming in from the ECU, it starts to add more complexity and capability to the development of the driver. And then as we move forward, there's even more that you can do to be able to develop the driver. But the lowest common denominator across all devices that are available from AIM, and we can, this is my point of view, it might not necessarily be of everyone, is that driver development is without a shadow of a doubt sort of the lowest common denominator on every device that exists. But then as we start getting into the aspect of vehicle operation and monitoring, that's where we're in this sort of GPS and ECU type of territory. And that'll start out as simply as sort of one of the loggers that has an ECU connection, where you can start logging information that's coming in from that ECU if your car has one. So anything that's there from how's the health of the engine in relation to RPMs or engine temps or oil pressure, or whatever comes in from that. And it allows you to start monitoring. And then the other aspect in terms of vehicle operation. The reason I put operation and monitoring, it could have been vehicle operation and analysis, is that vehicle operation is really sort of, okay, so I'm sitting in my car and I've got a device in front of me that's a dash, or it's got a display that's going to tell me something about how I'm operating the vehicle. which could be an RPM trace, for example, in terms of just when do I change gear, or it could be a sort of shift light indicator or something like that. Monitoring is where you can start getting into, okay, I can download the data, I can monitor its health, and I can monitor its activity. And that's where the devices start to kick in relation to sort of ECU to start off with. And then as you want to be able to start developing more, you may sort of want more than that. And so that gets in sort of the sensors territory of adding more sensors. And then the final part, I've sort of aspect, and I'd argue here, is chassis development. Now, many will argue you can develop the chassis of a car with the data that comes from the ECU, and you absolutely can. So many ECUs send so many different channels now. But if you want to be able to start seeing sort of the broader spectrum of opportunities to be able to develop that, then you want to be in a situation where you have a system that allows you to be able to add additional components and channels that allow you to be able to monitor that. And just to put it into context, if I wanted to be able to have a system that just brought in the ECU data from the car and tire pressure monitoring system, I need one of the more advanced dashes that allows for 2 ECU ports, as an example. And so all of these are different aspects. And so as you go through, you get into this sort of spectrum where it's a lap timer, and AIM Solo 2 as an example is perfect for that driver development with someone. It's only GPS data, but it's on the lower spectrum. Then you get into the middle ground where you are in a position where someone might just add a SmartyCam to a Solo 2DL, and it gives them driver development, and it also gives them vehicle operation and monitoring. And then you're getting into your dash and your logger. But as you go through that sort of a spectrum, the cost increases based upon what you want to be able to achieve from your car. And this is what's really important to be able to think about as you decide what you want to be able to do with that. But then I think other components, and the reason I'm telling you all this is I think that will hopefully translate into the questions and answers we look at, is, well, what kind of vehicle are we talking about? I've got a bit of a spelling mistake here, I've just noticed. Apologies for that. What kind of vehicle are we talking about? We're talking about this today, not necessarily, and I apologize for a bit of a bad spelling on this. I shall blame the spell checker for not finding that, even though it probably did. There are 2 key factors to think about for your vehicle. The first, I would argue, is the age of your vehicle, and then the other is the type of vehicle that you have. And this may also start to be able to sort of change some of the thresholds you're looking at. But the reason I simplified it into 2 is to make life simpler in that decision. Now, the age of the vehicle is particularly important with the number 1 bullet, which is there, which is, does it have an ECU? And does it have an ECU that will talk to the vehicle, to the device from it? That's the fundamental, most important sort of aspect here. And so from my personal experience, it wasn't until I started racing a 2001 BMW E46, so that chassis around the 2001 time span, did it have an ECU that was capable enough of being able to pass a signal that would allow me to be able to feed that into the dash that I was using at the time, be able to use it. Anything younger than that, sorry, younger is the wrong word, anything older than that, it would change the characteristics, because you may be in a position where you will not have any vehicle dynamics from the engine management system being passed into your logger, which means you need to take a different direction in relation to the sensors that you buy. And just to put it into context, if I went out and bought a brand new BMW Mini, and I wanted to be able to track day that car, I would be able to put in an AIM Solo 2DL, connect it to the ECU, and I would get RPMs, I'd get speed, I'd get oil pressure, I'd even see when the clutch is being used, the brake pressure, all sorts of things that would allow me to be able to use that car in the simplest sense of the dash. But then we think about many of the examples that I've given of my personal use right now of AIM devices. It's within a 1988 Formula Ford that was built before the internet was really a thing. And so as a result, ECUs weren't sort of available. And so I have to I have to buy separate channels or sensors to sense the RPM or the brake pressure or the oil pressure, which in that mini example would be passed from the ECU, versus the car that I have, it's being passed through sensors. And the reason that is sort of part of that is that the ECU changes the dynamics dramatically in terms of which device you choose to buy. Now, if you've got a car with an ECU and you don't want to tap into it and still use the sensors, that's totally available, but that's important. The next is the age. We talked about that a little bit, but old, new, or brand new may change sort of like the characteristics of the setup that you use. And this is something which, you know, I think over time sort of developing a better knowledge, but as you start to develop more and more understanding about things like the power distribution models and newer cars, and that's you know, a level of sophistication that should be sort of reserved for sort of more sort of modern tech. And then the last is it a new race build? And this is a silly thing to say, because new race builds could be somebody who's building a brand new Mazda MX-5, but the original chassis is from 1993. But in many respects, the age of the build is also important, because it might change the decisions you have when you install the device. And then the last aspect of this slide is then the type of vehicle, because this may change things based upon space and form and function. Sounds crazy, but if you've got a race car, you might have more dash space to be able to put in a larger dash. If you're a motorcycle rider, then you may have a much smaller space to be able to put in a dash. If you're a Formula car driver like I am, you might not even have a dash. You might have everything that's on the steering wheel. And so depending on the type of vehicle, it will change the type of characteristics and what you choose to buy. So bear all these things in mind, because they're important to be able to sort of consider as you sort of move forward. And the same thing applies to any of these. I didn't put plane in there, but it's interesting. If you have a smarty cam, you can also have an overlay that looks at aeroplane views as well, which I think is interesting. But these are the things to think about. And so it means that the last and final component is, what is the scenario that the device is being used for? And so if you think about it, if you're somebody like me who is a Formula race car driver who wants to be able to develop the driver, develop the chassis, and monitor the vehicle, then I need a setup that will allow me to be able to you know, have a form function, or form factor, I should say, that's on the steering wheel, that is a small enclosed space, that logs analog sensors that are coming from an old Ford 1600 engine, that is also then a Formula car. So if I want any kind of video, I've got to have a nice little bullet camera, versus if I'm somebody who is setting up, I could use that example of the Mini, and I'm a track day driver and I have a Mini Cooper S or a Cooper Works or whatever need be, I might want the form function of just, you know, something that sits on the windscreen that records the video and just gives me a little dash in terms of my lap time. So it's really important to know what kind of racing you're doing as well, because you don't want to necessarily overinvest in something that you'll never really ever be able to use. But similarly, you don't want to underinvest and never be able to upgrade it in the future, because that's the key. Do you want to expand your setup over time? And so, without necessarily going into sort of any more sort of considerations, I wanted to be able to sort of set this up, and hopefully if it's on YouTube, people will be able to stop and be able to think through this in terms of these are the components that are there. But it does change a lot of the decision making you're going to make. So what I was going to do is I'll start the conversation off with James, and I'll ask James to introduce himself in just a second. And then as we go through, I'll also be question master on the box. So if you've got questions or thoughts, please post them in the chat box. You can put them in the question box as well. I don't think it makes a difference. In fact, I think this one only has a chat box. So just post your questions and I'll ask them as we go. So with that, I will stop sharing. I will get us back to our conversation that way, which is nice. And so, James, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone to start off with?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name's James Mully. My title is Ops Manager at AIM Technologies. So sort of handle everything day to day that happens. Yeah, so everything from technical to sales, support, development. Yeah, everything that goes on, I've got some involvement with.
Brilliant. Well, it's you know, I've actually got 10 questions, which I've already sent James. I think there's 10 to start off with, but please, everyone feel free to ask as many questions as we go, because we'd rather answer live questions as we go, as well as these. But I'll start these off and start off with a question, and I'm not going to go in order in terms of what it is, but I'll start off with, you know, I'm driving an old Mazda MX-5. You could insert BMW 30 or any car that's pre-year 2000. I'm looking to get the basic channels RPMs, oil pressure, engine temp, and maybe other few key inputs. What system would you recommend if I didn't have a budget constraint at all?
I think that all comes down to, I suppose you want to display a lot of the information. You don't just want to log it, do you?
No, good question. I don't just want to see it. I want to develop the driver. I also want to be able to see all the data and monitor the car.
Yeah, so for me, I would be going towards, depending on size, your MXS, MXP, MXG logger dash. Obviously, with that, you can put into it as many sensors you want. A lot of people think that you can only run sort of 8 sensors into the dash, but obviously we can run channel expansions, and we can run a lot more sensors into the dash. So even if you've got an ECU, great. If it's a car that's on that borderline, if you haven't, then like you say, we can put sensors into it. I think it's sometimes people go with a Strada. We have it a lot day to day. Everyone goes, oh, I just need a display. So everyone buys a Strada. And that's like the non-logging version of the MXS, MXP, MXG. And then I would say 75% of people within a week will ring back up, or 2 weeks when they've first gone on track, and they go, I should have bought the data logging version. And then obviously for that, we do a bolt-in logging box that expands a Strada into a logger. But it does work out a little bit more expensive. So if I'm sat there with a first-time customer, I'll quite often say, look, are you think you're going to want, it goes back to what you say about, are you ever going to want to expand? I think sometimes you can limit yourself by buying a device that's limited in a certain way. If you've got the capabilities there and you don't use them to start off with, but in maybe 2 years' time, 3 years' time, you might want to use those. So yeah, if it was me recommending to a customer and they could afford it, I'd be pushing them towards the logging dashes.
Brilliant. So the next one is sort of focused on where we see a lot of AIM application, but it's interesting, we haven't done a webinar on it yet, so I think it might be something that's interesting to do, which is, the question is my child's getting into go-karting, but we've got a very tight budget. What would you recommend I buy for coaching?
Again, another question we get asked on a daily basis. And the same with everything with motorsport. Everyone says they've got a tight budget until you start almost selling the key features of the extra bits. But obviously the base point is the basic Micron 5S, which comes with obviously an RPM connection. It's got built-in GPS. It's obviously got one temperature input. That's normally enough to get somebody started. So that can be an underplug sensor for head temp. It can be a water temperature sensor. It can be an EGT sensor. And that's always a very good starting point. You can monitor the engine via the temperature and RPM, and you can obviously also see what the driver's doing with the GPS. But more and more now, when we start almost saying to the customers about the cameras that can plug directly into the Micron, we're seeing more and more customers purchase the cameras now as well, because of the benefit you can get, especially when you start plugging sensors and stuff into it. But yeah, a basic setup would just be the Micron 5 with a single temp, probably.
Sure. Thank you. So this is a question that I've received a few times, and I always know how to answer it exactly. I'm looking for a battery only, no external power, logging devices for my race car. What are my options? Because obviously a lot of cars don't actually have an alternator, so they want to drain the battery. So do we have options that are available that are, and how far does it go on battery alone?
So yeah, it's the solo range really. You got the two versions. You've got your basic Solo 2, which is all GPS based, and then you've got your Solo 2 DL, where you can obviously have your ECU connection, and then obviously you can add into that lambdas and cameras. If it's just running off the battery itself, it's not going to last very long when you start plugging lots of other things into it. But if it was just running off the battery itself, then we always say you would get a good day. If you were doing sort of 6 to 8 sessions a day, sort of 20 minutes, we'd say it lasts a day. But yeah, it's yeah, I would say most of the time we always try and say to somebody, always charge it up that night. You know, if you're doing a 2-day test or you're racing the next day, just take it out of the car, take it back to the hotel with you. Obviously, comes with a charger in the box. Just plug it in and let it charge overnight. It will turn off automatically when it's obviously fully charged. You've got no worries there. Yeah, quite a lot of people do that.
Does that apply to the Smarty Cam as well? Can you charge up the Smarty Cam as well and have them both running on battery, but neither of them plugged into the car?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah, they've both got an internal battery, so if you wanted to get, for example, the camera could also run on its own if you wanted it to. You could also trigger the camera itself, even if it wasn't connected to anything, you could run it. So yeah, that can be charged up as well. It's just, I would say for the camera, if you're running the camera as well, I would always try and power the camera, but it can be run off its battery and it will do a day, give or take, depending how long your sessions are and stuff like that. But yeah, it's the same.
Thank you. So this is one that I often get asked, and I bet many people do as they're looking to upgrade. I've got an older logger, and it could be, I've had it for people who've got an old Evo 4 or somebody who might have an original MXLP stick. And people are asking, can I upgrade with more modern day channels and cameras on older devices? Because sometimes people don't want to change the system if it's working, but they want to add new stuff. Is there a point where it's not possible anymore, or can you still add the new stuff to the older devices?
There always becomes a point with anything where technology's moved on so far, almost one of our great selling points, but also I would say negatives in some senses is how the quality of the stuff and how long it lasts. We have stuff come in now into the office when people send it in for repair, and we look at it and it's some of the first microns and stuff like that, and some of the first ever dashes, and you think, crikey, this is 20 years old. And then you say to the customer, he goes, oh, sorry, we can't get bits for it. And they go, well, why not? Well, yeah, it's try and get bits for a 20-year-old phone. But yeah, there's, for example, we have it at the moment with a lot of, quite popular one is Radical over here. I think it is in the States, well, it's worldwide, Radicals is art, but a lot of them are trying to plug all of the new GPSs into the old dashes. And unfortunately, it's not going to work. It's got to a point where some of the old MXLs and the new GPSs, they just can't communicate together. And we also get that with the new cameras, sometimes plugging them in. People are saying, for example, it won't auto trigger or won't auto record, or it won't take the GPS, the old GPS from the dash won't come through the Smarty Cam. And that's just to do with the fact that you're talking for technologies that's just two different technologies from so far apart. It sometimes just gets to a point where you can't combine the two. But at that point, there's always a conversation with us, and we can offer some form of if it's a loyal AIM customer, we can offer some sort of trading, for example, on the older stuff for the new things to try and sweeten that for people.
Brilliant. That's cool. Let's talk about motorcycles, because one of the things that oftentimes with motorcycles gets asked is space is a premium in relation to of any kind of sort of vehicle. I think the space is probably the most limited on a bike sometimes, although I can barely squeeze into my Formula Ford at times, but that's probably more me than anything else. But when you think about someone who's a sort of a motorcycle racer these days, and I put down here Yamaha R6, and they race that, what options are available for people to be able to, and what options are available in terms of sensors and everything, as well as, an ECU chart for somebody who's a bike rider, because I think that there's a lot of questions as to, is there anything suitable for bikes?
Yeah, we do a lot for bikes. I mean, us personally, our business has grown massively in the last 2 years for bike customers. I would say everything of ours could be used on a bike, because you don't necessarily just get obviously you get over here, you've got sidecars, sidebar and everything like that. So they have a big dash in them. But yeah, if space is a premium, you've got obviously all your solos. Again, from the basic Solo 2, which is just GPS based. We do the plug and play kits for the Solo 2 DL, which come with a direct DLC port connection to take the ECU information. We've got customers that run the MXM on bikes. And then a real popular setup for a lot of the race bikes is the Evo 4S with the GS dash. Obviously, with that, that's obviously the same sort of things what you've got in your Formula Ford. But with that, you can plug in a lot of sensors, suspension sensors, brake pressure sensors, lambda sensors. And that's a really, really popular setup. We sell a lot of kits for that. And then obviously recently, in the last sort of 3 years, AIM started doing their latest versions, I should say, of the complete plug and play bike dashes. About 3 years ago, or 2.5, 3 years ago now, we released the one for Kawasaki, ZX10, Gen 4, Gen 5. Pickup for that's been incredible. And obviously with that, everything can be plugged into that as well. So that's just literally 4 bolts, stock bike, take the stock dash off, install this, direct connection with the stock harness, plug and play, and you get so much more benefits. Just releasing the Suzuki dash that we developed as well for the latest version of the GX 1000, and that will be again a real popular dash. The bike side of things is huge. It's only getting bigger as well. Lots and lots of options. Again, it comes down to what you want to get out of the system, really. Whether it's just a lap time or you want a replacement dash, or you're going, for example, over here to a BSB round and you want to get every element of telemetry you can. Completely depends. Full range of stuff for motorcycles.
Brilliant. That sounds really good. So let's talk about, there's so many sort of different questions to be able to go through in terms of what's happening. Let's do it. It's great. We've got a question coming in. So I'm going to ask Kevin Straw. From Kevin Straw, I'm going to ask this question. Hi, I have an MXL2 with 2 SmartyCam bullet cameras, GPS with 1 button module, but can run only one, run out of ports to plug my lambda sensor into it. What expansion port do I need?
Okay, so that's a common question as well. So you just need to buy a data hub. So you can obviously daisy chain, for example. If you need to, and you get to the point, you can put 2 data hubs together, but it's obviously just the 5-pin EXP port, and they all go into that. So yeah, it's just I think it's a £50 hub that expands that cam port for GPS cameras. Quite simple.
Brilliant. Hopefully that helped answer your question on that one. So
if you want, Kevin, just I'm sure James can send you a link, or I can send you a link to the item you need. But yeah.
Fantastic. So one of the questions that I toyed with, and one of the challenges that I had was, okay, so I built a race car, I think it was in around sort of 2013 time. And so I had a choice at the time between an MXL2, I had a choice between an MXG, an MXS, and all sorts of different types of dash that would all fit in the race car. And they were all within a much for muchness in terms of price, in terms of, let's say there was a 10% delta in terms of price. From your point of view, is there a go-to sort of recommended setup for somebody who's looking just to sort of, set up, their new build, they're setting up a car, it does have an ECU, relatively basic, so they may want channels, but at the same time, of all the choices, are there go-to choices that people could have if they could install multiples? What are the popular ones that people choose?
I
could ask the most open-ended question, which is what do I need, without any qualification, but just putting it into context, it does feel like, from my point of view, when I was there, it was it was confusing in terms of I could have installed a number of different dashes into a race car. So, I ended up trying more than one. But what do you recommend to people? Because it's quite an investment and they want to get it right the first time. So have you figured out over time what the right go-to is out of all the dashes if you're setting out that way?
I suppose it almost comes back to it comes back to my first sort of answer, I suppose, the first question, and that is the go-to. For me, I would say the go-to dash, the most popular dash we do, and I'm sure it's globally the most popular, is the MXS, and that's in the Strada and logging function. So I would say our go-to for a race car is going to be always one of the MX ranges, and finding out really whether they want to, whether the logging is going to be something that they're interested in and they're going to use. But yeah, I suppose we always pride ourselves on trying to recommend the right thing the first time, and we do that on a day-to-day basis with the sales guys and really sort of talk every customer through every option, because the last thing we want someone to do, and it does happen, is people think they know what they want, they come online and buy it, and then they're on the phone saying, oh, I thought it would do this. So yeah, we do try and help everyone as much as we can, but I would say that always the go-to products for a race car, for a display, and logging, if they want logging, is an MXS, MXP, MXG, one of those three. Like you say, because the MXL2s, they're very popular, but from my point of view, for the extra £100, you can have a full color TFT screen and go for an MXS. So when you're at that sort of level, yeah, I always would push someone towards the MXS, MXP, MXG, just purely because I think it's better value for money, really. Yeah. So yeah.
Good. I love that the better value for money makes sense as well. I think a lot of people are, as you said, for the color screen and being able to, and then for many folks who may be watching, having had an MXL2, which I absolutely loved, it was the first sort of transition into color for AIM from the original sort of MXL pieces. But the fact that you can change things and color things in different alarms made it sort of, that extra investment made a lot of sense. And that's that operating side that needs to be thought through. One of the questions, and we've got a couple coming in, which is absolutely brilliant. And I love that. My last question that I have, as we start getting into other people's questions, although I do have others, is what is the most common upgrade that people do with their setups? They've done their initial investment, they've got dash set up in bike or car, whatever need be. What are the core things that people go for, and then what are the next series of things that they upgrade to on a regular basis?
Well, the most popular is always the SmartyCam. It's normally, it tends to be a cost point of view. I think people always want the SmartyCam when they first buy a dash, but I think sometimes obviously they've got a certain budget to spend and they'll come back and buy the SmartyCam later, which is very, very common. After that, I would say one that's becoming really popular for us at the moment is the TPMS system, if it can be connected to the correct product. Obviously, that has to work on CAN 2 at the moment, so it does rule out a few products. But that is becoming extremely popular, and I know we've done a webinar about that recently, and it was a very popular webinar. It's becoming, almost a go-to for a lot of people. And yeah, I suppose this is where the difference is for car or bike. A lot of the bike guys, if they buy a dash or they buy an Evo, they'll always come back, and their go-to always, even with the plug and play dashes, their go-to after the first initial purchase will be, again, Smarty camera, but also suspension sensors and brake pressure sensors. They become very popular. And again, that does apply to car racing as well. It's just particularly, it seems to be every bike customer you have, that is always the next thing they purchase. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. And just for everyone, sort of, one of the things that sort of James just mentioned there that sort of triggered my thought as you're going through some of your consideration, these conversations you need to have as you're thinking of either upgrading or installing for the first time. The conversation about TPMS is we did a webinar a few months ago. It's been a sort of a popular topic because the price point for TPMS systems is reduced, and it's reduced probably in the last 3-4 years to the price point where it's less than the cost of a set of tires. And so the challenge being is if you do want to add it, it takes an ECU port to be able to sort of feed the data into your system. And so if you have a system that only has one ECU port and you're using that for your engine management system, it might prompt you to choose a different system. So that's really important to think through. As you think about that, will you want to grow? If a TPMS system is sort of second in line after a SmartyCam, then it gets to the point where investing in the right dash that's got 2 ports to allow you to be able to bring in your car's ECU and the TPMS system is an important thing to consider as you go through this. And so, yeah, it's probably the recommendation if you're considering this, talking to AIM, is to, I'd argue, sort of explain the channels you want and be guided as to what the right dashes have that, rather than choosing your dash and then saying, does it do this channel and does it do that channel? Because that could go on for quite a while. So we have a couple of questions in the box, which is great. Mike asks, I have an MXL2 in my Seat or Seat, depending on where you're from, Super Copa, which works great. I also have a PDM 32 and display sat here. I'm torn between fitting the PDM and keeping the car factory standard. Please convince me either way. That's a good question.
It's a very good question. For me, the PDM is phenomenal. It's a massive step forward in what we've done in the last couple of years. It's so popular. For me, yeah, I would be installing the PDM. I'm guessing, like, so you've got a display sat there. I don't know which one you've got. Probably, I would have said the 6-inch. I don't know, but yeah, I would be fitting the PDM because the extra stuff you can get out of the PDM is phenomenal. Again, it depends. We do have people that are buying the PDM just to have a 10-inch display, because we do a 10-inch display for the PDM and nothing else. It only works with the PDM. So we are getting people buying the PDM setup and just effectively giving it an ECU connection just to use the big display. So again, depends what you're going to use it for. But if it's in a race car and you're going to actually wire the PDM in as it's supposed to be, to obviously for power distribution to all of the different starters, lights, etc., fuel pump, then 100% fit the PDM, because it will log everything. And there's some OEM customers that we're working with at the moment that are finding the PDM so helpful for fault diagnosing and everything like that. So yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, if it was me, I'd be wiring the PDM.
Good. Don asks, I have an MXL Pro Dash out of my old track day car. However, at the time, there was a limited choice of sensors and there was no option to use the more common type of Bosch Junior timer type sensors. Is there anything like that available now?
I'm not sure I fully understand what he means by the Bosch Junior timer type of sensors, but in terms of obviously sensors for the MXL Pro, we've got a massive list of sensors that can connect to even the older dashes. So it's probably drop us a line, drop us an email or a call and speak to the sales guys and find out what it is you actually want to have sensors for. And we can tell you if it's available or not. I don't know, Don, do you want to, what is it you actually are after? What do you want to monitor? You can jump in and cut and talk if you want to.
Yeah, feel free to come off mute, Don, if you need to. Otherwise, write in the box and we can continue that.
Yeah, thanks, guys. James, yeah, I think it was just more for the universality of what's available. Sort of, I think there was, as I say, at the time, this is going back, gosh, 10, 12 years ago, a limited range of sensors available for, oil, water, temperature measurements, pressures, etc., that kind of thing. So it's more kind of a fluid side of things rather than connecting to the ECU, because it was a fairly basic setup I had at the time.
Yeah, no, for temperatures, pressures, everything like that. Yes, it's available. It's just obviously you've got analog inputs on the Pro. So yeah, you just have to wire in the appropriate sensors into the dash. They are available. Again, we got tech guys. If you're not sure how to do it, if you need help with that, we can talk through everything like that with you. So yeah, they're available. Just drop us a line on it. Go on.
Do they need to be calibrated? Sometimes I don't know whether things have technology's moved on and the calibration's all taken care of now automatically, but in the past you used to have to sort of get the calibration curves and set that all up. Is that a factor now?
With the new dashes, it's all auto-calibrated. I think the MXL Pro is actually before my time. But if I remember correctly, I think on there you have to calibrate. I think there's some sensors potentially that are auto-calibrated, but I know you can obviously calibrate custom sensors. So yeah, I'd probably, if I'm honest, I'll have to ask one of the tech guys on that because it's a little bit before my time. But yeah, on the new stuff is all auto-calibrated, but if you want to put a custom sensor into that, you can do that as well.
Good. Thank you very much. Appreciate the feedback.
No problems.
Thanks, Don. Great. So I know we're coming up to close of today's webinar, which has been a great way of being able to get an idea in terms of just all the different types of questions and things that are coming up. One of the things I will say, and will ask James, is based on your experience and your team's experience, what would be your top advice that you would give people as they're thinking about building their systems out now? And also sort of in the same sort of vein, what are the big pitfalls you see that people do when they're, when they're sort of, putting new systems in that you'd recommend sort of to avoid, so that people could sort of, leave this webinar sort of thinking, these are things to think about to make sure I don't make those mistakes, or to really sort of focus on these best practices?
Yeah, a common one we have is, and it's a real almost, I suppose it's not, I don't want to use the word basic, it's not basic, but it's a mistake that commonly happens is somebody will buy a dashboard, they will buy some of our equipment. It happens a lot with the Strada dashes, the logger dashes, and they will go off on their own and chop bits off, or for example the wiring, they will go and try and make their own harnesses, and quite often we get quite a few dashes that will come back that have been connected up incorrectly and damaged. And I would say a lot of people will not necessarily moan, they know when they've made a mistake, but from our side, I just think we've got a technical support line there that's 9 to 5, 5 days a week. I just think people just need to send us an email, drop us a line. We're more than happy to help out in any way we can. I hate seeing products come back that someone says on the repair form, I bought it a week ago, I've connected the positive and negative up wrong. And it sounds like a really simple thing, but it's easily done, and damage the product. And unfortunately, it's a costly mistake. I would say the install is always potentially something, not that is difficult, but people sometimes overlook. A lot of our stuff is plug and play, so it is very simple and easy to install, but there are some devices out there that, if you're plugging custom bits into the dashes, then just pick up the phone, give us a call, and just ask a bit of advice. Because yeah, like I say, I hate seeing stuff come back that's a week, 2 weeks old. Like I say, half the time technical guys are sat there twiddling their thumbs, so want to keep them busy. So yeah, I would say that for me is probably something I don't like seeing. But yeah, in terms of just making sure you purchase something that has the capability to do something further down the line, because people will buy something, find out it's not quite right for what they want, and it costs them a lot more money in the long run. So yeah, always thinking ahead, really thinking ahead. If you don't use it, then it doesn't matter. It's, you know, our stuff's got phenomenal secondhand retail value. So if you get to the point and you're not using any half of it, then like I say, it all holds its money very, very well. But if you've got the capability to use it and you do use it, then fantastic. But if you can't plug a camera into it, if you can't plug TPMS into it, if you can't plug sensors into it, then again, it does end up costing you a lot more money in the long run.
That's good advice. I love that. So do you want to write in the text box how best people can reach out to ask the questions they need as they're going through sort of setting up? I think that'll probably be the easiest thing. And what I'll say is, with only a couple of minutes left, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to ask. You know, we tried the Q&A format this time around, so if you want to drop us a note saying what you thought of that one next time around, we will be I'm sure we're focusing on next webinar. We'll be thinking about that in the next sort of few days. But if you've got any ideas as to what you'd like to cover off, or what you'd like us to really sort of focus on, please let us know. And so we'll give it a minute or so longer to see if there are any other questions. And other than that, we'll say thanks so much for attending. Excellent. And just to sort of confirm, sales@aimshot.com and support@aimtechnologies.com. And that's for the folks who are watching on YouTube, so won't see the chat box. And so we'll make sure that those pieces of information are put in the drop down of the description within the video, so you can find that information as well, just in case you're watching this at a later date on YouTube. And with that, I'll say thanks so much to everyone, and see you all again, and hopefully others in a month from now. So take care.